Please welcome Lisa and Christine. Hello everyone.
Hello.
Just in time for morning tea, ladies.
Oh, that first, yeah.
So I'm Christine.
And I'm Lisa. Honestly, this project was just fabulous. I mean, admittedly, I went on a big holiday in the middle to Norway and France, but you know, you have to do these things, don't you? And Christine, I brought Christine in because she's a good friend of mine. We've known each other and worked together for a really long time.
And as I always say, we're still friends. Okay?
Christine did all the hard work of looking through the whole collection and arranging it and all that sort of thing. Anyway, so I was just going to, we probably won't take you through the whole report. It is 30 odd pages and you can have a bit of a read of it. But just for those of you, you're an institution that has a collection. We mostly work with small museums that are museums first who have a collection rather than a corporate. Oh, my museum's a bit corporate, isn't it? So I work at the Queensland Police Museum. That's my full-time job. And that's a corporate museum. But they've had a museum within the corporation for a really long time. So normally when we go to a museum, we ask them to tell us what's significant. And then we do the research and find out whether it is or not and find out the stories. And although some of you, or most of you maybe, knew what was some of the collection were, you didn't really know what the whole collection was, which is why Christine had to look in boxes.
So we also did a little of that by meeting the wonderful volunteers.
Exactly.
And Richard's morning teas on Friday. Or other mornings.
I heard about the cakes.
Yes.
I'm disappointed that I haven't had a cake on a Friday. But
We've also had that generous sharing from the people
Exactly,
that I would ask questions of or expose my ignorance about Braille equipment and Braille.
So that was fantastic. So thank you to all volunteers that helped Christine with that information, and some of you, I think, discovered things about the collection that you didn't know. It's certainly a really large and very interesting collection. So just so you know, when we do a statement of significance or write a significance report, the process was developed to encourage principally small museums to find out more about their collections. So I don't know how many of you visit museums, and you notice probably only about 10% in any museum, including mine, is on display, and the rest of it's out in the collection store. And often in a small museum, it's grown, you guys have just grown over time. So everything in your collection was used across the 126 years as part of the business that you do, which is transcribing into Braille and working with non-sighted and low-sighted individuals. It's an interesting collection from that point of view. But small museums often don't know what they have in their collection, and so they're wanting to get funding. But these days, funding, they won't give you funding unless you can actually tell them something about your collection. So they devised a significance assessment process to allow people basically to tell stories and find out information about their collections, which is what we did for you. So Christine went through the collection and found the whole run of your Braille equipment, which goes from really very early 1890s all the way through to today. So it's an amazing timeline of equipment used.
And you'll find I just butt in every now and again. You would think you could go to a resource where you could actually find all this, and yes, we've got one of those, and work your way along. It's not so straightforward because, as you're probably aware, the Braille writers may be United States centric or European centric, British, and so it is not as straightforward as it first sounds.
Not always as obvious.
No.
So find out information about everything and do some research. Consult knowledgeable people, so those are your volunteers, and thank you very much again. We have to look at the context, so how these objects fit into your work and how they fit in sort of Queensland-wide, Australia-wide and internationally. So we were looking at international collections, and I think, what's the collection called in America that had?
The American Printing House.
Which if you not find that
Printing
online.
History.
Printing History. They've got an amazing collection of Braille equipment, so we could do a comparative look at what was internationally, what's in other Braille collections around Australia, so then we can say how significant your collection is, and your collection is has the broadest amount of equipment, for example, than anywhere else in Australia. Only really the American one is as well matched to your collection, so that was good. And then we obviously write a report and do a bit of research and then make the connections with, which was very easy, well not very easy, but good to do because
It's
you have
time consuming.
time consuming, but you have a lot of, you know your own history as it were, so you've got the 100-year history and then the other history that was done not that long ago, and now you're 125. So, and then finding those connections with everyone who's on the transcribers board, who was the presidents, the secretaries, because they gave equipment, and so we interlink all the names and those connections into the story we write about the objects. So obviously, if you look in the report, we've done five objects. There are more significant objects in the collection, but we can't, it's too hard, well, it's too time consuming to actually do those
You have to
histories.
start somewhere.
You have to start somewhere.
So can I also butt in and say that this is more time that's spent with the collection, the more that gets uncovered. Because it's like finding the little bit, unlike an onion where you keep peeling back, you just find a little bit and it takes you on another tangent, which is what happened when we started looking into people and equipment, because it just opened up all of these stories that can be used to tell the story of Braille House and the early.
So probably the important thing to point out is significance assessment is not, is a living document. Because if, this is Christine's next job, cross fingers, you get the preservation needs assessment funding, that's the next step. Then she will probably find out more information about those objects we've written about, and there might be changes to the timeline. Yeah, so you can, give it a couple of years, we can update the significance assessment, and you'll have the other report anyway, cross fingers, touch wood. I'm sure you'll get the funding. It's such a fabulous collection and deserves
I think even the feedback that came following the report from, and Andrew's probably better to speak to that, the feedback from NLA about the assessment.
and the report, and they said it's a really interesting collection. And they really, they're very interested in the collection
And supportive, so.
So as part of the significance report, we put in, there's 9 recommendations there. There only are recommendations, and it's really up to the association to decide which one
It's
of those.
aspirational.
Aspirational.
Yes.
So we've got in there about the preservation needs assessment, so if that comes off, then Christine will undertake that work, and you might want to explain what a preservation needs.
So whilst the significance looks at that, as Lisa said, preservation looks, as the name suggests, is what can we do to help the collection be preserved in perpetuity. If we look at it now as a collection rather than as a working repository of equipment, what can we do to keep it into another 126 years? So what can we do in terms of how we store things, how we box it? Most importantly is also how it's actually, we know where it is, what its location is, so that we can actually go and find it when we need to find it, those sorts of things. So it looks at all of the common things that can go wrong with materials, and then looking at how we can better or preventative conservation.
So those 5 things that I did the significance assessments on, or Christine can look more closely at their health, I guess, the condition that they're in, whether they need to be cared for a bit more, have a specialised box, or whether they need some conservation treatment. Oh, and there's also other things in the collection. A lot of the things need a bit of care and a bit of cleaning, so that's what you.
Yes, so like looking at the tunnelly, the things that get older, they might have been in storage, we might have dust or insects, and maybe just a bit of a clean and a storage box so that there's no more damage to some of the edges of the items, that sort of thing. So that's the next stage, that's the preservation needs assessment.
And then the rest of the recommendations about how you want to go forwards with the collection. There's a lot of duplication in the collection, so are there ways that you can move that collection on to other? Vision Australia has a collection, they might not have the things that you have, so ways to, bound the collection. You might, whether you're going to decide to do a museum in the new building when you get it, touch wood,
Because that was one of our other difficulties. Where did the collection end and the items that you use today begin? So normally with a museum, it's in a time capsule basically.
It's all things we don't use anymore.
And that's what we've sort of bounded the collection by 2000, and items, objects, tools, equipment that doesn't get used anymore.
Yeah, so, and then Vision Australia especially was interested to see what you have, so whether you want to put your things online in a collection management system, so that they can see what, everybody else can see what you've got, for people who might be doing research into machines, or whatever people want to do. So the other recommendations are about collection related things, tracking the collection and cataloguing it and those sort of things.
So what were the 5 key things we identified as being, the one that always sticks in my mind as being significant was the crab printing press. Printing
press, yes.
It's interesting for the background that it was actually developed by a forward-thinking female librarian from the Melbourne State Library of Victoria, who had an idea of putting a couple of pieces of equipment that already existed together with the help of a fellow who had a bit of nous, a bit like a Mr. Tunnelly she had access to, and that's what then created this crab printer. And then
It's a duplicator.
And from that, it was used here in Queensland for 30 years to do the reports. Newsletters
Yeah.
that were sent out. Why I find that interesting is that why is it called a crab duplicator? Because the idea came from Miss Crab. And yet when you read the ABH, the American Printing History information, it suggests it's a crab printer because it moves sideways. Not that it actually came from a Miss Crab.
Yeah, so you find out these interesting connections that other people don't know about, that you can advertise. We did the Tunley collection, so that's really interesting. The Stainsby Wayne portable braille writing machine, because I think that's the one that was first bought in 1924, and everyone got terribly excited about having a machine to do the work a bit quicker.
And of course it's not that we've forgotten the individuals, but the individuals are important, and Mr. Tunnelly is one of them. It's like the information that we have from Mercy Dickinson, Mercy Griffin, that is also important, but we needed to look at initially what's in the collection, and then those stories will follow on
The
from
connections. Connections to collection. We did the transcriber boards as well, so we thought those were pretty significant, and there's lots of information about what those women and men, their connections across the collection and the work they did here. Like I said, there's lots of other things. Or the Dr. Marigold, Charles Dickens book that was transcribed into Braille in 1897 as an indicator of how long the process has been going on.
Was there any questions about the process, or Lisa and our involvement, or it's all? Yes.
How do you get your job? That sounds awesome.
Yeah, we sometimes talk about this. How do we get our job?
I did it the hard way. Well, we both of us been in the industry for a really long time. I've actually lost count now.
Yeah,
But
we
I
talk in
started
decades.
as a volunteer when it was easy to do that. So you volunteered at an institution, then I got a job as a guide, and then I did study in museums, and then I was a consultant for a while, and then I got this job. So I've been in this job for nearly 26 years. And
We've been working together for at least 3 decades.
yeah, that's all we're going to say, because otherwise we're really old. But you didn't start as a volunteer, though.
I did. I had a science degree and nowhere to go. So at that time, I went to the Queensland Museum. So we've both come through the Queensland Museum. Between us, we've worked Queensland Museum. So in the museum sector, the archive sector, the library sector, We also volunteer our time with museum and galleries people where we go regionally and contribute our thoughts.
So you can still volunteer, but it doesn't really have the segue into a job anymore.
No.
Normally you're studying and then you
Do
take it on
placements and go from there.
I do have a question. To me, this seems like a really significant document because it's a document that funders and governments will listen to because it's recording the significance of the collection. In terms of its use now, is it going to be critical for the organisation to get funding? Is that going to be, apart from documenting what you've got, so they know, but like, is that its main purpose now?
Well, I guess it's really useful for times when even if you were thinking about a new building and, you know, if you want to put an exhibition space in, then that would be, if you're wanting funding to do that, then that would be the document that you would use. It's really specific to the collections within the institution or the association. But I would honestly put it anywhere I would just include it so they can understand about you, because we've got the timeline in the end there, so they can look at, you know, all the things across time.
So when you know your collection, it's often difficult to explain to, even when we were talking about the equipment and my use of incorrect terminology early on, it's a way that it becomes much more, it's a link that it can be used. And my background is conservation, Lisa's is more the museum collection management side, but from a conservation preservation side, when you have we do workshops and we say, who has unlimited resources? People, money, time, which you don't have. So how can I prioritise where I put my limited resources? This document will assist in the planning, and it's often used with other smaller institutions where they can decide, well, this year we will prioritise making sure that we'll allocate a certain amount of money or crowdsource or seek funding to promote these key elements in our collection, so that when we go to someone where we're fundraising or Andrew or Richard's out talking about things, we can showcase this particular object. This is why this is important, and this is what we've spent some of our money on, but it's only a drop in the ocean of what we need. So yes, it underpins so much.
I think it's a great marketing tool too, because not all people know about you, but not everybody knows about what you do. The great work, fabulous work you've been doing for 126 years. So I would, just include it. If they ask about the history of Braille House and the Queensland Braille Writing Association, I'd say, well, have a look at this. You know, we've got this amazing collection, we've got these amazing volunteers, we've been going for 126 years. We have all these connections to Brisbane history across time.
Even Richard's learned something, haven't you, Richard?
I have.
What is that, Richard?
I'm carrying a very old book in a box.